Hi, my name is Justin Jones. My group partners are Kathy Fujiwara, Ashley Emery, and Kyle Gravener. We're going to talk to you about MedMen Canada, a Canadian subsidiary. We're going to look at why this is a great market. We're going to understand why it's a business opportunity specifically for MedMen. We're going to do a cage analysis, talk about risk and considerations, and then finally do our market entry strategy into Canada. If you don't know, MedMen is a publicly traded United States-based cannabis company focused on retail. It's actually traded on the Canadian Stock Exchange already. Adam Bierman and Andrew Maudlin founded this company back in 2010 in California, and it took advantage of both the 2015 and 2018 expansion of California laws. At this point, it is now a nationwide company going from Florida to New York to California, and has over 1,000 employees. Using their success in the United States, MedMen has established a global expansion plan where they will form MedMen Canada, a subsidiary of the United States-based operation. The expansion plan will focus on the Canadian province of British Columbia and very specifically Vancouver. In preparation for this global expansion, MedMen already has cross-border partnerships with Canadian companies Cronos Group and the largest federally licensed cannabis manufacturer in Canada, Aurora Cannabis. A little bit more about the market. Medical cannabis was legalized nationwide in Canada in 2001, and in October of 2018, Canada became the second country in the world to formally legalize cannabis possession, acquisition, and consumption. In 2019, Canada is expected to pass a law legalizing the use of alternative cannabis products such as drinks, edibles, and topicals. Around 5 million people in Canada use cannabis at least once a year, and it's predicted that around 3.8 million people use it recreationally. Until late 2018, all retail storefronts in Canada were operated by the government. As they've transitioned out of this and transitioned it into private retail, Canada has allowed each province to set up its own recreational licensing process. Now, British Columbia is one of the only provinces in Canada that does not follow a lottery process. There's an application process that includes a $7,500 fee. This does allow for more store operators, which could be a risk. However, this also allows us to purchase licenses from some of the 24 operators that are already conducting business in the province. The cannabis industry in British Columbia is estimated to be worth around $6 billion annually. They produce almost 40% of all Canadian cannabis, and the pride in the local product is really high. According to a 2012 statistic, British Columbia has the second highest cannabis usage per capita in Canada, and opinion polls show they have the greatest support for recreational legalization. Again, just a number of reasons why we're specifically targeting the Vancouver area. So following the same successful formula they use with the United States, MedMen's going to enter the Canadian market in Vancouver by raising private funds, purchasing already established cannabis retailers. Each MedMen retail location operates independently with private funding and is then ran by MedMen Enterprises. MedMen will enter Canada by purchasing at least 2 licenses with a goal to expand that number as quickly as possible. As the cannabis retail market can become saturated in Vancouver with very little limitations on licensing, it's important that MedMen will highlight their competitive advantages. MedMen's created the largest United States cannabis retailer because of their unique business model. They have a very unique customer experience for its cannabis customer, a very sleek storefront with almost like an Apple or Starbucks feel, a rigorous training process for staff, and a loyalty reward system that does not exist anywhere else in the cannabis industry. And even though MedMen has a very strong brand presence in the United States, the Canadian market is not nearly as aware of the brand. Looking at that low brand affinity, it's important that upon market entry into Canada, it's imperative that MedMen Canada quickly strengthen brand awareness, highlight its customer advantages. To do this, MedMen will offer some limited time 10% discount coupons to all new customers. They're going to advertise in Canadian-based cannabis magazines. They're going to build a social media following within Canada, and they're going to partner with Canadian social media influencers who are present in the cannabis community. There's opportunity both in the US and Canada for large growth in this industry. However, with Canada's recent legalization of cannabis, it just makes the trend that much stronger in Canada versus the US. This is going to be a huge key as we understand our potential customers and clients. Looking into our customers, Canadian consumers have been highly influenced by advertisements. They will go after trendy products, but they also expect a very high quality sales service and after sales customer support. Both of these things are areas that MedMen excels at in the US market. Also looking at Canadian consumers, the middle age or baby boomer generation is expanding there. They care very much about their food. They care much about natural organic health. Because of this, Canadians are also very concerned about their personal comfort and well-being. We feel this plays in again to MedMen's. This aligns directly with the MedMen's US core consumer, as MedMen pushes the health and wellness lifestyle as much as they push the ability to get high. When you dig into the cultural dimension theory, you start to see that again, Canada and the United States are very similar. We look at this as a bonus, we look at this as a plus, but there are a couple of key dimensions that we will have to adjust for: individualism, masculinity, and a more long-term orientation focus in Canada. But again, looking through this, it's very similar, it's very close. These are going to be tweaks rather than wholesale changes. When you look at the Canadian cannabis consumer, there are again a number of similarities between the countries. Inhaling or smoking continues to be the preferred method. Edibles and topicals are following. And everyone is pairing this with music, movies, snacks, and even exercise. But again, the number one thing that both Canadian and US users use this product for is relaxation. There's also some very strong similarities between the US and Canadian consumer when it comes to age and gender, both around the 40-year-old mark. And in both countries, men use much more than women. So Canada has a highly skilled and educated workforce. They have increasing technology, manufacturing, mining industries. Similar to the United States, Canada's a market-oriented economic system with a very affluent living standard. There's also a ton of back and forth between the US and Canada. Canada exported around $584 billion in goods last year, and 3/4 of that went to the US. Canada is the largest supplier of oil, gas, uranium, electrical power for the US, and Canada doesn't border on any other country. With both the US-Canada Free Trade Agreement and NAFTA, there's an increased trade and economic integration between the two companies. Looking at this, we again think of this as a strength, as many people in the Canadian economy are used to dealing with, working with, buying from American companies. There is some regulatory and political risk, more so on the regulatory side. The Canadian law is still not set, still changing rapidly, even things month to month. This is very similar to the environment that MedMen has encountered and dealt with in the US. Because of this, we feel very strongly that the same MedMen setup and the same standardization of roles will be able to transfer over into Canada and mitigate this risk. The natural disaster risk is extremely low. Earthquakes is probably the only true disaster that could happen. But again, a very low risk compared to anywhere else we're going to go in the world. Another piece of risk that we have looked at is contamination. Any sort of crop contamination that could spread, damage the products, would put stores out of business. Because of this, though, Canada requires chain of custody documentation. They have a seed to sale tracking system that allows any product to immediately be identified every step along the way. Where was it grown? Who distributed it? Who sold it? Because of this, any issues that do arise, we feel very strongly will be able to be dealt with quickly. As always in any retail environment, there's a competitive risk. We feel though this is low to moderate at this point. The transition into the private sector is just now occurring. Because of that, there's very little brand loyalty in either storefronts or even products. It's based much more around an experience and much more around a pricing system, which MedMen has both the buying power and the training to lead the way. The growing market does worry us a little bit. There's only a few growers. They're huge. They supply the entire country. And in addition, those growers are also looking to export. So they're currently working on how to get to Europe, how to get to South America. If they can figure out how to make more money in another country, we worry that that would choke out the supply to our own stores. We think that the inherent pride in Canada and the desire to have their own products sold nearby is something that will keep them there, but it is worth noting. So part of our concern when it comes to supply chain is the good is the bad. So while Canadian supply must be grown in Canada, there are limitations because of Canada's climate. So almost all of this cannabis is grown indoors. It's a highly expensive process. It takes hundreds of millions to even billions of dollars for these companies to grow it. And there's certain places in Canada that have become hubs for this growing. Currently, supply is tight. It is expected to catch up to demand around 2021. But even then, we're still just anticipating what the demand could be as you look into tourism and add-on sales and exporting to other countries. What we feel is probably the highest risk is called the gray market. And that's the illicit or unlicensed distributors or retailers who are selling either off the street or out of storefronts without paying their taxes. Again, this allows the consumer to purchase at a much lower price. However, this is the same thing that MedMen has encountered in the state of California. In the U.S., state governments have fallen significantly short of their estimated cannabis tax revenue because of these illicit sellers. And companies have been able to work with the governments in order to get them to clean these places up. The same expectation will happen in Canada. It will be a short-term problem that if companies can weather, will eventually go away as the government looks to increase their tax revenue through using legal retailers who pay their taxes. As we enter the Canadian market, we've already established that this will be a direct investment into Canada. We'll be owning our own retail licenses. However, there will be partnerships that need to be put in place. We're looking for those high quality, big name growers that have that Canadian cachet already established. We're looking for a location that we can reach both the Vancouver resident as well as any tourists that come through the area. Internally, our plan is to look at our staffing structure will be very similar to what we do in the United States. However, understanding that our internal customer is a different person and looking at our Hofstede, we will know that our training programs are going to have to adjust because of this. Our own brands is our second part of that. We're going to need to establish our own grow facilities. We're going to need to look at our own distribution. It's critical both from a profit as well as from adding in the flashy US piece that is missing from many of the other current dispensaries. Finally, this will lead us to our expansion throughout Canada. We'll continue to stay only in large cities, big cities, and the final step will be looking at a possibility to export our product to other countries due to the fact that Canada allows this. Thank you.